There are moments in life that split your world in half, before and after. For me, that moment came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in October. The maple trees outside my window were ablaze with autumn colors, and I was sorting through old photo albums in my living room, reminiscing about happier times. Times when my husband Harold was still alive. Times when my son Thomas still looked at me with eyes full of love and respect. The phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence of my Oak Ridge home. I smiled, seeing Thomas's name flash across the screen. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 weeks, unusual for us, but I'd attributed it to his busy season at the accounting firm. Perhaps he was calling to invite me to dinner with the grandkids, something I'd been missing terribly since Vanessa had started making excuses about why I couldn't visit. "Thomas," I answered warmly, "I was just looking at your 5th grade graduation photos." The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. Then came his voice, cold, rushed, and louder than necessary. Words that would echo in my mind for months to come. "Don't come to dinner, Mom. My wife doesn't want you here. You're buying your apartment, so call the bank and come here." Then the click of disconnection. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the hollow sound of the call ending and my world shattering. I stood frozen, phone still pressed against my ear, as if keeping it there might somehow turn back time and replace those brutal words with the loving son I thought I knew. 38 years of raising him, nursing him through fevers, attending every soccer game, helping him through college applications, supporting him when he met Vanessa. All of it seemed to evaporate in that 15-second phone call. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the carpet. I didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, I felt a curious numbness spreading through my body, as if my nervous system couldn't quite process the magnitude of the rejection. I walked to the kitchen in a daze, filled the kettle for tea, a habit formed over decades whenever crisis struck. The routine motions, setting out the cup, selecting a tea bag, waiting for the water to boil, gave my mind the precious minutes it needed to begin comprehending what had just happened. My son had banished me from his life. My daughter-in-law didn't want me around, and somehow, this was connected to the apartment I was in the process of buying, a modest 2-bedroom in Riverside Apartments that I'd chosen specifically because it was only 10 minutes from their home in Willow Creek Estates. The tea sat untouched as the first tears came. Not gentle tears of sadness, but hot, angry drops that seemed to burn trails down my cheeks. For nearly an hour, I sat at my kitchen table, alternating between sobbing and staring vacantly at the family photos magneted to my refrigerator. Thomas's wedding day, Robert's birth, Emma's first birthday. Moments when I believed I was an essential, irreplaceable part of their lives. When the tears finally subsided, something else began to take their place. A hardening, a resolve. I had been a high school English teacher for 32 years before retiring. I had faced down generations of difficult teenagers, navigated school politics, and managed a household single-handedly after Harold's death 3 years ago. I was not someone who collapsed under pressure. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked hard at my reflection. The woman staring back had silver-streaked hair styled in a practical bob, crow's feet from years of laughter, and now red-rimmed eyes from crying. But there was something else there too. A steeliness that reminded me of my mother, who had survived the Great Depression and taught me that Wilson women don't break, they adapt. "You will not be discarded," I told my reflection firmly. I changed from my comfortable house clothes into a proper outfit. Charcoal slacks, a burgundy blouse, sensible pumps. I applied lipstick with a steady hand and brushed my hair until it gleamed under the bathroom lights. Whatever was happening, I would face it with dignity. The drive to First National Bank of Oak Ridge took 15 minutes. I'd been working with Gregory Palmer there to secure financing for my new apartment. He was expecting me later in the week, but Thomas's cryptic instruction to call the bank and come here needed investigation. The bank's interior was cool and quiet, the hushed atmosphere of money and secrets. Gregory looked surprised when his assistant announced my arrival, but he welcomed me into his office with the practiced courtesy of a man who had spent decades managing other people's financial crises. "Mrs. Wilson, we weren't expecting you until Friday. Is everything all right? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, keeping my spine straight despite the exhaustion of emotional collapse. My son called. He seemed to think there was some urgency regarding my loan application. Something about needing to come here immediately. Gregory's brow furrowed. That's strange. Your financing was approved last week. We were just waiting for you to sign the final paperwork on Friday. He tapped at his computer keyboard, scanning the screen. There's nothing urgent that would require immediate attention. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Could you check if Thomas has called regarding my account? Or if there have been any other inquiries? More typing, another frown. No calls from Thomas. However, he paused, clicking through several screens. This is unusual. Someone accessed your account information yesterday, using the online portal. That's impossible, I said. I don't use online banking. Gregory's expression became grave. Mrs. Wilson, I think we should look into this further. While we're at it, let me just verify all your accounts are as they should be. What happened next would alter the course of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. As Gregory dug deeper into my financial records, he discovered something that had been hidden from me for years, something my late husband had arranged before his death. Mrs. Wilson, Gregory said, his voice lowered despite us being alone in his office. Are you aware that your husband established a substantial life insurance policy before he passed? I wasn't. Harold and I had always been open about our finances, or so I thought. We had lived comfortably on our teachers' salaries, saved prudently, and planned for a modest retirement. The revelation that he had secretly put aside a significant sum specifically to protect me sent a surge of conflicting emotions through my body. Love for his foresight, anger at his secrecy, and a strange growing sense of power. How substantial? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Gregory turned the monitor so I could see the figure displayed there. $2 million, an amount that transformed me from a comfortable widow to a woman of significant means, an amount that would allow me to do much more than purchase a small apartment. As the reality of my new financial situation sank in, something shifted inside me. The hurt and rejection from Thomas's call remained, but alongside it grew something new, a seed of possibility. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt a sense of true agency, not just the freedom to choose which modest apartment to downsize to, but the power to reshape my life entirely, and perhaps to address whatever had led my son to that cruel phone call. I didn't share these thoughts with Gregory. Instead, I thanked him for the information and asked him to prepare a complete overview of my financial position for our Friday meeting. As I drove home, my mind was already calculating, planning, considering options that would have seemed impossible hours before. That evening, I called my oldest friend, Diana Taylor, who owned the Reading Corner bookstore downtown. I need your advice, I told her, my voice calm despite the storm of emotions still raging inside me. And your absolute discretion. Margaret, you sound different, Diana replied, concern evident in her voice. What's happened? I took a deep breath. The pain of Thomas's rejection still raw, but now tempered by determination. I've just discovered that I'm a wealthy woman, Diana, and I believe my son and daughter-in-law are hiding something from me, something that made Thomas tell me never to come to their home again. The silence on Diana's end lasted only a moment. Come over, now. I'll close the shop early and open a bottle of wine. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. As I gathered my purse and car keys, I caught sight of the family photo on my mantle. Thomas, Vanessa, Robert, and Emma at last year's Christmas dinner. My heart ached at the thought of being separated from my grandchildren, of being erased from their lives by whatever game Vanessa was playing. This isn't over, I whispered to the photograph. Not by a long shot. Little did I know as I drove toward Diana's bookstore that evening, my quest for answers would lead to discoveries far more disturbing than I could have imagined. Discoveries that would transform me from a heartbroken mother into a woman calculating the perfect revenge against those who had betrayed me. The call that broke my heart was only the beginning. What came next would test everything I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, and about my own capacity for strategic retribution. Diana's bookstore had always been my sanctuary. Even before Harold passed, I would escape there during life's difficult moments, finding solace among the shelves of stories more dramatic than my own. But that evening, as I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the reading corner, I knew I was bringing a tale that could rival any fiction on her shelves. The closed sign was already hanging, the warm lighting dimmed to a gentle glow. Diana emerged from behind the counter, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, reading glasses dangling from a chain around her neck. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know about my emotional state. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the cozy reading nook in the back corner, where two worn leather armchairs faced each other beside a small table. A bottle of Merlot was already open, breathing beside two glasses. Diana had always been perceptive that way. I sank into the familiar chair, the leather creaking beneath me like an old friend acknowledging my presence. Diana poured the wine with the steady hand of a woman who had weathered her own storms. A difficult divorce 15 years ago, her son's struggle with addiction, the near bankruptcy of her beloved bookstore during the economic downturn. If anyone could understand complicated family dynamics, it was Diana. "Now," she said, handing me a glass and settling into the opposite chair, "tell me everything." And so I did. The devastating phone call, the shocking discovery at the bank, the sudden wealth that had transformed my options in an instant. Diana listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to anger to calculating interest. $2 million, she finally said, swirling the last of her wine. "Harold, you clever, secretive man." "I'm still trying to process it myself," I admitted. All these years of careful budgeting, of worrying about retirement, and he had this safety net waiting that I knew nothing about. Diana leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And you're certain Thomas's call is connected to this money somehow? He specifically mentioned my apartment purchase, and the bank in the same breath as telling me Vanessa doesn't want me around. It can't be coincidence." Diana nodded slowly, reaching for the bottle to refill our glasses. "Have you noticed anything else unusual recently? Changes in Thomas's behavior? In Vanessa's?" I closed my eyes, mentally reviewing the past few months. "Thomas has been canceling our weekly lunches more often. When I do see him, he seems distracted, almost nervous. Vanessa has been increasingly controlling about when I can see the grandchildren. She claims they're too busy with activities, but Robert called me secretly last month asking why I hadn't been coming to his baseball games." "She's isolating you," Diana said flatly. Classic manipulator tactic. A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the bookstore. Diana had articulated what my heart had feared, but my mind hadn't fully acknowledged. But why now? I wondered aloud. Vanessa has never particularly liked me, but this sudden banishment seems extreme. Diana took a thoughtful sip of wine. "Follow the money, Margaret. Always follow the money." Those words echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. Follow the money. If my newfound wealth was somehow connected to Thomas's rejection, I needed to understand how and why. But more importantly, I needed to protect myself, and possibly my grandchildren, from whatever game Vanessa was playing. The next morning, I called in a favor from Harold's old friend, James Franklin, who had become one of Oak Ridge's most respected attorneys after retiring from his Boston practice. We met at his home office, a converted sunroom overlooking a meticulously maintained garden. James had aged gracefully, his tall frame still straight, his handshake firm despite the liver spots dotting his hands. "Margaret," he greeted me warmly, "it's been too long. How are you holding up?" "That's a complicated question, James," I replied, settling into the chair he offered. "I've recently discovered some financial arrangements Harold made that I was unaware of." His bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Harold always was thorough in his planning. What can I help you with?" Over the next hour, I laid out the situation. The money, Thomas's call, my suspicions. James listened intently, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. "First things first," he said when I'd finished. "We need to secure your assets before taking any other steps. If someone is after your money, we should make it significantly more difficult to access." That morning was the beginning of what I would come to think of as my financial fortress. James helped me establish a trust, restructure my accounts, and create a corporate entity, Wilson Heritage LLC, that would hold and manage my assets with me as the sole director. He also introduced me to his investigator, Michael Reeves, a former police detective with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Michael can look into Vanessa's background more deeply, James suggested. If there's something to find, he'll uncover it. I hesitated only briefly. The Margaret Wilson of 1 week ago, the devoted mother and grandmother who baked cookies every Sunday and never questioned her daughter-in-law's excuses, might have balked at such an invasion of privacy. But that Margaret had died with Thomas's phone call, this new Margaret, the one with steel in her spine and fire in her heart, merely nodded. "Do it," I said. "I want to know everything." The following weeks passed in a curious paradox of time. Days that crawled by without contact from my son or grandchildren, yet weeks that flew by as I reconstructed my life and formulated my plan. Michael's investigation yielded results faster than I expected. Vanessa's carefully cultivated image as a dedicated marketing executive and devoted mother had significant cracks beneath the surface. She had been systematically isolating Thomas from not just me, but from his college friends, his former colleagues, anyone who had known him before their marriage. Classic control tactics, Michael explained, often used by those with narcissistic tendencies. But the true bombshell came 3 weeks into the investigation. Michael requested an urgent meeting at Diana's bookstore after hours. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his expression grave as he laid a manila folder on the table between us. "I believe I've discovered why your daughter-in-law has suddenly accelerated her campaign to remove you from the family picture." Inside the folder were photographs. Vanessa entering a hotel. Vanessa dining intimately with a man who was definitely not my son. Vanessa kissing this stranger in a parked car. The evidence was irrefutable. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Jason Mercer, Senior Vice President at Rivera Marketing, Vanessa's direct superior." Michael shuffled through more papers. "There's more. I managed to access some of her personal emails through legal means." He emphasized the last words, though I hardly cared about the legality at that moment. "She's planning to leave Thomas after securing her promotion to marketing director, which Mercer has apparently promised her." I stared at the email printouts, the casual cruelty of Vanessa's words leaping off the page. "Once I get this promotion, I'm done with him and that annoying mother of his. The kids will adjust. They always do." The pain that lanced through me was physical, as if someone had driven a knife between my ribs, not just for myself, but for Thomas, for my grandchildren who were pawns in Vanessa's game. "There's one more thing," Michael said, pulling out another document, "and this might explain the timing of your son's call." It was a transcript of a conversation between Vanessa and Jason discussing my financial situation. Somehow, Vanessa had discovered Harold's insurance policy before I did. She had been accessing my financial information, possibly through Thomas's laptop or phone, monitoring my accounts, waiting for the moment the insurance money became available. "She doesn't want you around because you're a complication to her exit strategy," Michael explained. "And now that you have significant assets, you're also a threat. If you help Thomas financially after she leaves, it could impact her divorce settlement." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Vanessa had been planning to leave my son all along. My presence, and now my money, complicated her scheme, so I had to be removed from the equation. That night, alone in my house, I didn't cry. The time for tears had passed. Instead, I began to plan, not just to protect myself and my assets, but to ensure that Vanessa could never hurt my son or grandchildren again. The next morning, I called Gregory at the bank. "I'd like to discuss some investment opportunities," I told him. "Specifically commercial real estate." Gregory was surprised but accommodating. "Any particular type of property you're interested in?" "Yes," I replied, my voice calm despite the fire burning inside me. "I'd like to purchase a commercial building, preferably one with a stable, long-term tenant, perhaps an accounting firm." The confusion in Gregory's voice was evident. "An accounting firm?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Specifically, the Oak Ridge Financial Center on Maple Avenue." There was a pause before understanding dawned in his voice. "Mrs. Wilson, that's the building where your son's firm is located." "Yes, I'm aware." My tone remained pleasant, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the first move in my carefully orchestrated revenge. "I believe real estate is a sound investment in today's market. Don't you agree? Over the next 4 months, with Gregory's reluctant assistance and James's legal expertise, I methodically executed my plan. The purchase of the Oak Ridge Financial Center was just the beginning. I also acquired a significant stake in Rivera Marketing through a series of shell companies created by James, not enough to control the company, but enough to have influence when the time came. Michael continued his surveillance, documenting every meeting between Vanessa and Jason, every lie she told Thomas about working late, every time she neglected my grandchildren for her affair. The dossier of evidence grew thicker by the week. Diana became my confidant and occasional voice of reason, reminding me when my plans veered too far into territory that might hurt Thomas or the children. "Remember who the real enemy is," she would say when my anger threatened to consume me. "And remember who you're really trying to protect." Through it all, the silence from Thomas was deafening. I made occasional attempts to contact him. Neutral text messages asking about the children, voicemails expressing concern about his well-being, all met with brief, formal responses or none at all. It was as if Vanessa had erected a wall between us brick by brick until my own son became a stranger. Robert, my tech-savvy grandson, was my only real connection to the family. At 12, he was old enough to have his own phone, which Vanessa apparently didn't monitor as closely as she should have. His texts were infrequent but precious. Updates about his sister Emma, complaints about his mother's increasingly erratic behavior, confessions that he missed our Sunday baking sessions. Dad seemed sad all the time. He texted one night, "Mom says it's because of work stress, but I don't believe her." I wanted to tell him everything, to warn him about his mother's betrayal, but he was still a child. Instead, I responded with reassurances and love, promising that things would get better soon. It wasn't a lie. I was ensuring it would be true. 6 months after Thomas's devastating phone call, my preparations were complete. The pieces were in place, the trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. I chose their anniversary as the date. 15 years of a marriage built on Vanessa's manipulation and deceit. I sent a formal invitation to Maple Street Diner, the restaurant where Thomas had proposed. The card was cream-colored, expensive stock, my handwriting precise and elegant. "Thomas and Vanessa, your presence is requested for an anniversary dinner. Maple Street Diner, 7 p.m., May 15th. Private room reserved. Business attire suggested. Margaret." I knew they would come. Thomas out of guilt and lingering filial obligation. Vanessa out of curiosity and perhaps a desire to maintain appearances before her planned departure. What neither of them knew was that this dinner wouldn't be a reconciliation. It would be a reckoning. As I prepared for that evening, selecting a sleek black dress that Harold had always loved, applying my makeup with careful precision, I felt a strange calm descend over me. 6 months of pain, planning, and patience were about to culminate in this moment. I studied my reflection in the mirror, the determined set of my jaw, the clarity in my eyes, the straight line of my shoulders. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked stronger, more formidable than the mother and grandmother who had received that cruel phone call half a year ago. "You wanted me gone," I told my reflection, thinking of Vanessa's scheming. "But instead, you made me dangerous." I arrived at the diner early to ensure everything was in place. The private back room was set as I had requested, a round table with 5 chairs, gentle lighting, a bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Gregory from the bank was already there, nervously checking his watch. Sophia, my realtor, arrived moments later, followed by James with his briefcase of documents. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" James asked quietly as we took our seats. "Once we start, there's no going back." I thought of Thomas's cold voice on the phone, of Vanessa's cruel words in those emails, of Robert's sad texts about his father's depression, of little Emma asking why Grandma never visited anymore. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied, straightening the folders laid at each place setting. "They started this war. I'm simply ending it." At precisely 7 p.m., I heard their voices in the main dining room. Thomas asking about the private reservation. Vanessa's higher-pitched response, a note of irritation evident even through the closed door. Then the door swung open and they stood there, my son looking thin and tired, dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago, and Vanessa, perfectly groomed as always, her expression shifting rapidly from annoyance to shock as she took in the assembled group. "Mom?" Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "What is this?" I smiled calmly, gesturing to the empty chairs. "Happy anniversary. Please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." The silence that followed my invitation was deafening. Thomas and Vanessa remained frozen in the doorway, their anniversary dinner clearly not proceeding as they had anticipated. I kept my smile in place, steady and unnerving in its calmness. Years of handling unruly high school students had taught me the power of composed silence. Vanessa recovered first, her marketing executive persona sliding into place like a mask. "Margaret," she said, her voice honey-sweet with underlying venom. "What a surprise. When we received your invitation, we assumed it would be just the three of us." Her eyes swept over Gregory, Sophia, and James with barely disguised disdain. "Plans change," I replied simply. "Rather like dinner invitations that get rescinded with a phone call." The barb found its mark. Thomas flinched visibly, his gaze dropping to the floor. 6 months had passed since that call, yet the wound remained fresh for both of us. "Please sit," I repeated, gesturing to the empty chairs. "The champagne will get warm." They moved forward reluctantly, like actors forced onto a stage for a play they hadn't rehearsed. Thomas pulled out Vanessa's chair, always the gentleman even now, before taking his own seat. Up close, the changes in my son were even more apparent. The slump of his shoulders, the nervous twitch in his left eye that hadn't been there since his college exam days, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "I've been meaning to call." "No, you haven't," I interrupted, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "But that's not why we're here tonight." I nodded to James, who opened his briefcase and distributed additional folders to Thomas and Vanessa. The ones already at their place settings remained untouched. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, not opening the folder, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a nervous rhythm on its surface. "Information," I replied. "That first folder contains details of my recent real estate acquisition. You might find it interesting reading." Thomas, always more curious than his wife, opened his folder. I watched as confusion, then shock, then understanding crossed his features in rapid succession. "You bought our office building?" he asked incredulously. "The entire Oak Ridge Financial Center." Vanessa's head whipped toward him, then back to me, her composed facade cracking slightly. "That's not possible. That building is worth millions." $4.7 million to be precise, Gregory interjected, his banker's precision cutting through the tension. "Mrs. Wilson completed the purchase last month through her company, Wilson Heritage LLC." "What company?" Thomas looked increasingly bewildered. "Mom, what's going on? Where did you get that kind of money?" I took a deliberate sip of water, letting the moment stretch. "Your father was more forward-thinking than either of us knew, Thomas. He left provisions I was unaware of until recently." I kept my explanation vague, watching Vanessa's reaction carefully. A flash of something, recognition, fear, crossed her features before she composed herself again. So Michael had been right. She had known about the insurance money before I did. As the new owner, I continued calmly, "I've been reviewing the lease agreements for all tenants. Your firm's lease, Thomas, comes up for renewal next month." The implications hung in the air. Thomas paled slightly. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Wouldn't what?" I asked innocently. "Triple the rent? Decline to renew? These are just standard business considerations." Vanessa's mask slipped entirely then, anger flashing in her eyes. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to punish Thomas for keeping his distance? For finally setting some boundaries with his mother?" "Boundaries," I echoed, letting a hint of steel enter my voice. "Is that what we're calling it when you tell your mother never to come to dinner because your wife doesn't want her there?" Thomas flinched again. "Mom, I was upset that day. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I cut him off. "Or rather, someone meant it very much." My gaze shifted pointedly to Vanessa. "But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's more to discuss." I gestured to the second folder. "Please, continue reading." This time, Vanessa snatched her folder open, perhaps hoping to get ahead of whatever revelation was coming next. I watched as her eyes widened, her complexion paling beneath her perfect makeup as she recognized the photographs inside. Her and Jason Mercer entering the Oak Ridge Inn, holding hands in his car, kissing in the elevator of his apartment building. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice barely audible. Thomas, slower to open his folder, froze as he saw the first photograph. His hand trembled as he turned to the next page, then the next, documenting months of his wife's infidelity in merciless detail. "No," he said more to himself than anyone else. "No, this can't be right. I assure you, it is," Michael Reeves said, speaking for the first time from where he sat slightly behind me. "Every photograph is date and time-stamped. The documentation is comprehensive and would stand up in any court." Thomas looked up, noticing Michael for the first time. "Who are you?" "Michael Reeves, private investigator," he replied matter-of-factly. "I've been documenting your wife's affair with Jason Mercer for the past 5 months." The blood drained completely from Thomas's face. He turned to Vanessa, who was now sitting rigid in her chair, her eyes darting between the photographs and me like a cornered animal. "Jason Mercer? Your boss?" Thomas's voice cracked. "Vanessa, tell me this isn't true." For a moment, I almost pitied Vanessa. The careful house of cards she had built was collapsing around her. But then I remembered Robert's sad texts, Emma's confusion over my absence, Thomas's deteriorating health, all collateral damage in Vanessa's selfish schemes. "It's not what it looks like," Vanessa attempted, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "These are work meetings, taken out of context. There are recordings," I interrupted softly. "Page 12. Thomas flipped to the transcript, his eyes scanning the document rapidly. I knew exactly what he was reading. Vanessa's cold assessment of their marriage, her plans to leave once her promotion came through, her dismissive comments about him and the children adjusting to the divorce she was planning. The color that had drained from his face returned in a rush of angry red. "5 years, he read aloud, his voice shaking. "I've wasted 5 years with him and that annoying mother of his. That's what you said about our marriage, about our family." Vanessa's eyes hardened, her strategy shifting from denial to attack. "This is all illegal, these recordings, these photos. This is an invasion of privacy." She turned to me, voice dripping with venom. "You pathetic, lonely old woman. You couldn't stand that Thomas finally chose me over you, could you? So you fabricated all of this." "Nothing is fabricated," I cut in, my voice still calm, despite the rage building inside me at her attempted deflection. "And everything was obtained legally. James made sure of that. You can verify the authenticity of every document," James added, his attorney's voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms. "We anticipated challenges to the evidence." I reached for the third folder, sliding it across the table. "But we're not finished yet." Thomas opened it mechanically as if on autopilot, his world already shattered by the previous revelations. Inside was a copy of the deed to his house, the beautiful colonial in Willow Creek Estates, where my grandchildren had grown up, where I had helped plant the garden and paint the nursery when Emma was born. "I don't understand," he said, frowning at the legal document. "This is our house deed. What does this have to do with anything?" "Turn to page 3, James instructed gently. "Paragraph 4. Thomas did as directed," reading silently at first, then aloud as comprehension dawned. "In the event that Margaret Wilson is ever prevented from visiting or maintaining a relationship with her grandchildren at the aforementioned property, ownership shall revert in full to said Margaret Wilson as stipulated in the family trust established by Harold Wilson." He looked up, confusion and betrayal warring in his expression. "Dad put this in our house deed? When he helped with the down payment? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know," I answered honestly. "Your father never told me about this clause, just as he never told me about the insurance policy. He was protecting me in his way." I paused, letting the implication sink in. "When you called to tell me never to come to dinner, that Vanessa didn't want me there, you triggered this clause." "Technically, I've owned your house for the past 6 months." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Vanessa seemed stunned into speechlessness. "So let me understand," Thomas finally said, his voice unnaturally calm. "My wife has been having an affair and planning to divorce me. My mother owns both my office building and apparently my house. And all of this has been happening while I've been working 60-hour weeks, trying to make partner. He laughed, a hollow sound entirely devoid of humor. Is there anything else I should know? Any other secrets? As if on cue, the door to the private dining room swung open. All heads turned to see Robert standing there, my 12-year-old grandson looking both nervous and determined in his school clothes, his tablet clutched tightly to his chest. "Robert?" Thomas half rose from his chair. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Connor's house for a sleepover." "I lied," Robert admitted, stepping fully into the room. "I asked Connor's mom to drop me here instead." He glanced at me briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, before turning back to his father. "I have something you need to see, Dad." "Robert, go home right now," Vanessa commanded, her voice sharp with panic. "This doesn't concern you." "Yes, it does," he countered, showing a backbone I hadn't realized he possessed. "It concerns all of us." He approached the table, setting his tablet down in front of Thomas. "I've been taking screenshots," he explained, his young voice steady despite the tension in the room. "For months now, ever since Mom started acting weird about Grandma." Thomas looked bewildered but tapped the screen to wake it up. "Screenshots of what, buddy?" "Everything," Robert replied simply. "Mom deleting Grandma's texts from your phone when you're in the shower. Mom telling us Grandma canceled our plans when she never did. Mom throwing away Grandma's letters before you could see them." With each accusation, Vanessa's face grew paler, her lips pressed into a thin line. Thomas scrolled through the images on the tablet, his expression darkening with each swipe. "You did this?" he asked Vanessa, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deliberately kept my mother away from us, from the kids?" "I was protecting our family," Vanessa insisted, desperation creeping into her tone. "Your mother has always been too involved, too controlling." "Grandma sent me a birthday card with tickets to the baseball game," Robert interrupted. "You told me it got lost in the mail, but I saw you put it through the shredder." The simple, devastating truth from a child's mouth seemed to hit Thomas harder than all the sophisticated evidence we had gathered. He stared at his son, as if seeing him for the first time, then turned that same bewildered gaze on his wife. "Why?" he asked, the single word containing oceans of hurt. "Why would you do this to us? To our children?" Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. "Oh, grow up, Thomas," she snapped. "You've always been so blind when it comes to your mother. She manipulates you, controls you with her guilt and her neediness. I was freeing you from that." "While sleeping with your boss," I added quietly. How liberating for Thomas. Vanessa turned on me, years of carefully concealed hatred blazing in her eyes. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this little ambush solves everything?" She laughed bitterly. "You've got your evidence, your revenge, but you've also destroyed your son's marriage, broken up his family. Congratulations, Margaret. Mother of the Year." The barb struck home, precisely as she'd intended. Had I gone too far? In my determination to expose Vanessa's betrayal, had I caused irreparable damage to my son, to my grandchildren? Doubt crept in for the first time since I'd begun planning this confrontation. But then Thomas spoke, his voice stronger than it had been all evening. "No, Vanessa. You destroyed our marriage when you started lying, when you started cheating, when you cut my mother out of our lives for your own selfish reasons." He stood up, towering over the table. "You don't get to blame her for exposing the truth." He turned to me, and I saw in his eyes a glimpse of the boy I had raised. Honest, kind, but never weak. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned things. I should have seen what was happening." I reached across the table and took his hand. "We were both manipulated, Thomas, but that ends tonight." "Indeed it does," Vanessa said coldly, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'm leaving. Robert, come with me." "No," Robert said, moving to stand beside his father. "I'm staying with Dad." Vanessa's mask slipped entirely then, fury distorting her features. "Fine. Enjoy your little family reunion. But this isn't over, Margaret. Not by a long shot." She snatched her purse from the back of her chair. "I'll see you all in court." "I look forward to it," James replied mildly. "The judge will find the evidence most interesting." Vanessa stormed toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. "Thomas," she said, not turning around, "when you come to your senses and realize what your mother has done to our family, Call me." Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her with finality. The silence that followed was broken by Robert's tentative voice. "Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Thomas put his arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close. "I don't know, buddy. But whatever happens, we're going to be okay. All of us." He looked at me, grief and gratitude warring in his expression. Even if it's not the family we thought we had. In that moment, looking at my son and grandson standing together against the wreckage of Vanessa's deception, I knew that the revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had transformed into something else entirely. Not just the destruction of a lie, but the possibility of rebuilding something true. "You have until tomorrow to decide what happens next, Thomas," I said quietly. "Your family or your wife. I didn't start this war, but I'm prepared to finish it." The drive home from the Maple Street diner that night was heavy with emotion. Thomas had insisted on driving Robert home himself, promising to talk things through with his son. I offered my apartment as neutral territory if they needed space away from the house, away from Vanessa's lingering presence. But Thomas declined, determined to face the situation head-on. "I need to be there when Emma wakes up," he explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "She shouldn't have to wonder where everyone went." I watched them leave, Thomas's arms still protectively around Robert's shoulders, and felt a curious mixture of triumph and uncertainty. The confrontation had gone largely as planned. Vanessa exposed, Thomas enlightened, but the aftermath remained unpredictable. Had I truly helped my son and grandchildren, or had I merely substituted one family crisis for another? Diana was waiting at my apartment when I arrived home, perched anxiously on my sofa with a pot of tea already brewed. She'd been my emergency contact, ready to take the grandchildren if the confrontation had devolved beyond repair. "Well?" she demanded as soon as I walked through the door. "How did it go?" I sank into the armchair across from her, suddenly bone-weary. Exactly as expected and nothing like I imagined. Over the next hour, I recounted the evening's events, Vanessa's denials, Thomas's devastation, Robert's unexpected intervention. Diana listened intently, her expression shifting between satisfaction and concern. "So Vanessa stormed out," she summarized when I finished. "Thomas and Robert went home to Emma. And now what?" "Now we wait," I replied, staring into my cooling tea. "Thomas has a decision to make." "Do you really think there's a decision?" Diana asked incredulously. "After everything Vanessa's done?" I sighed, setting my cup down. 15 years of marriage doesn't disappear in one night, Diana. No matter how justified the reason, Thomas might still try to salvage something for the children's sake. After she cheated? After she deliberately separated you from your family? Diana shook her head in disbelief. "The woman is poison, Margaret. I know that. You know that. But Thomas loved her once." I closed my eyes briefly, remembering my son's expression as he looked at those photographs. Love doesn't always die cleanly. Diana reached across and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Margaret. Whatever happens next, you gave Thomas the truth. He deserved that much." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. The truth. After months of Vanessa's lies, the truth felt both liberating and dangerous, like removing a bandage to find the wound beneath still raw. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying the confrontation, wondering what was happening at the house in Willow Creek Estates. Was Vanessa there? Was she and Thomas arguing? Had she packed her bags? Or was she trying to manipulate her way back into his good graces? And what about Emma? Was my 9-year-old granddaughter sleeping peacefully, unaware that her family had fractured irreparably? Dawn was breaking when my phone finally rang. Thomas's name flashed on the screen, sending my heart racing. I answered immediately. "Mom?" His voice sounded rough, as if he'd been crying, or perhaps he hadn't slept either. "I'm here," I said, sitting up in bed. "Are you all right?" A humorless laugh. "Not even remotely, but that's not why I'm calling." He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. "Can you come over? The kids are asking for you, especially Emma. She's confused and upset, and she keeps asking why Grandma never visits anymore." Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt lightheaded. "Of course, I can be there in 20 minutes. "Good. And Mom?" Another pause. "Vanessa won't be here. She came back late last night, packed some things and left. Said she's staying with a friend." Jason Mercer, most likely, though I didn't say this aloud. I'm sorry, Thomas. Are you? He asked, not unkindly, just wearily. I'm sorry for your pain, I clarified. I'm sorry for the children's confusion. I'm not sorry for exposing the truth. Fair enough, he conceded. See you soon. I dressed quickly, opting for comfortable clothes rather than the armor-like outfits I'd worn to my strategic meetings over the past months. Today wasn't about confrontation or revenge. It was about reconnection. The drive to Willow Creek Estates was achingly familiar, a route I had traveled countless times before Vanessa's machinations had cut me off from my family. The neighborhood was stirring to life, joggers on the sidewalks, sprinklers activating on manicured lawns, garage doors rising to release vehicles for the morning commute. Normal life continuing despite the seismic shifts in our family's foundation. Thomas's house, my house technically, though I had no intention of enforcing that particular revelation, looked the same as always. The blue hydrangeas I had helped plant still bloomed along the front walk. The porch swing where I used to read with the children still swayed gently in the morning breeze. Before I could even ring the doorbell, it flew open. Emma stood there in her unicorn pajamas, her blonde hair a tangled mess, her blue eyes, so like Harold's, wide with excitement. "Grandma!" she shrieked, launching herself at me with the unrestrained enthusiasm only a 9-year-old can muster. "You came back! You came back!" I caught her, my arms wrapping around her small frame as she clung to me like a koala. The scent of her strawberry shampoo, the warmth of her body against mine, sensations I had missed desperately over the past months. "Of course I came back, sweetheart," I murmured into her hair, fighting back tears. I never wanted to leave. Over Emma's shoulder, I saw Thomas standing in the hallway, Robert beside him. Both looked exhausted with dark circles under their eyes, but there was something else in Thomas's expression, a clarity that hadn't been there at the diner, as if the fog of Vanessa's manipulation was finally lifting. Emma pulled back, her face suddenly serious. "Mommy said you were too busy for us, that you moved away because you didn't want to babysit anymore." The casual cruelty of the lie stole my breath. "Oh, Emma, that's not true. Not any of it. I've missed you and Robert terribly." "I knew it," Robert declared, stepping forward. "I told Emma you wouldn't just disappear like that, not without saying goodbye." Thomas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's all go sit down. We have a lot to talk about." The kitchen was exactly as I remembered it, the cheerful yellow walls I had helped paint, the children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator, the scratch on the table from when Robert had pressed too hard with his pencil while doing homework. Yet it felt different somehow, as if Vanessa's absence had altered the very atmosphere of the room. Thomas busied himself making coffee, while the children peppered me with questions. Where had I been? Why hadn't I come to Robert's baseball championship? Did I know Emma had lost 2 teeth? I answered as honestly as I could, without delving into the uglier aspects of the situation, assuring them repeatedly that I had never stopped loving them, never stopped wanting to be part of their lives. When Thomas finally joined us at the table, sliding a mug of coffee toward me, prepared exactly as I liked it with just a splash of cream, his expression was resolute. "I've been up all night," he began, addressing all 3 of us, "thinking about everything that happened yesterday, everything that's been happening for months, maybe years." He looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology, Mom. I should have questioned things more, should have realized something wasn't right. You trusted your wife," I said gently, "as you should have been able to." He shook his head. "It goes deeper than that. I let Vanessa come between us because it was easier than standing up to her. I chose the path of least resistance, and you all suffered for it." His gaze shifted to his children, "Especially you 2. "Is Mom coming back?" Emma asked in a small voice. Thomas hesitated, clearly struggling with how to answer. "Mom needs some time to think about things," he said finally, "and so do I. But no matter what happens between Mom and me, we both love you very much." It was the right answer, honest without being brutal, acknowledging the uncertainty without terrifying the children. I felt a surge of pride in my son's handling of the situation. "Is it because of the fighting?" Robert asked, more perceptive than his father realized. "You and Mom have been fighting a lot." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Partly, yes. Adults sometimes have problems they need to work through, like how Mom yells at you for working late. But then she works late all the time, Robert pressed. Or how she told Dad that Grandma canceled coming to my dance recital. But really she just didn't give Dad the message, Emma added, surprising us all with her awareness. Thomas and I exchanged glances, both realizing the children had absorbed far more of the dysfunction than we had understood. Yes, like those things, Thomas acknowledged. But I don't want you two worrying about adult problems. That's for me. For us, he included me with a nod, to handle. Is Grandma going to live with us now? Emma asked hopefully, changing tack with the lightning speed of childhood. Thomas looked to me, eyebrows raised in question. We hadn't discussed this, hadn't had time to consider any practical arrangements beyond the immediate confrontation with Vanessa. I don't think so, sweetheart, I answered carefully. But I'll be around a lot more, I promise. You could have the guest room, Robert suggested practically. It's just storing Mom's exercise equipment that she never uses anyway. I smiled at his pragmatism. We'll figure something out. The important thing is that we're together again. Thomas cleared his throat. Actually, there's something else we need to discuss. He turned to the children. How would you two feel about going to Connor's house for a few hours? His mom called this morning to reschedule the sleepover, and I thought today might be a good day for it. Emma bounced in her seat. Yes, Connor has a new puppy. Robert was more suspicious. Are you and Grandma going to talk about Mom? We have a lot to figure out, Thomas admitted. Adult things. Robert considered this, then nodded sagely. Okay, but I want to know what's going to happen. I'm old enough. You are, Thomas agreed. And I promise we'll talk more later, as a family. Once the children were dressed and ready, Thomas drove them to Connor's house, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my thoughts and memories. I wandered through the house, noting the subtle changes since I'd last been there. New curtains in the living room, a different arrangement of photographs on the mantel. I noticed with a pang that family photos including me had been removed, replaced with professional portraits of just Thomas, Vanessa, and the children. In Emma's room, I found drawings she had made of our family, crayon stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, Robert, me, and tucked in the corner of several, a smaller figure labeled Grandma. She had kept me in her pictures even when I was absent from her life. The discovery brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thomas returned about 40 minutes later, looking marginally more composed. He had changed into fresh clothes and combed his hair, though the exhaustion remained etched in his features. They're settled at Connor's, he reported, finding me in the kitchen where I had started washing the breakfast dishes. A simple, nurturing task to occupy my hands. His mom said they can stay for lunch too, so we have a few hours. I nodded, drying my hands on a dish towel. Where do we start? With this, Thomas said, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then placed it on the table between us. A recording began to play. I don't care what you have to tell him. Vanessa's voice, clear and cold. Just make sure Margaret understands she's not welcome anymore. We're finally getting somewhere with the separation plan, and I can't have her interfering. A male voice. Jason Mercer, I presumed, responded. What about the kids? Won't they ask questions? They're children, Vanessa dismissed. Tell them Grandma's busy. They'll forget about her in a month. Besides, once I get this promotion and we finalize everything, they'll adjust to the new normal. Kids always do. Thomas stopped the recording, his expression grim. I found this on Vanessa's laptop this morning. She left it behind in her hurry to pack. There are dozens of recordings, emails, text messages, all discussing their relationship, their plans, some dating back almost 2 years. 2 years! The betrayal was even deeper than we had known. I'm so sorry, Thomas, I said, meaning it sincerely despite my vindication. No mother wants to see her child suffer, even when the suffering leads to necessary truth. Don't be, he replied firmly. You tried to warn me years ago that something wasn't right with Vanessa, that she was isolating me from friends, from you. I didn't listen. I remembered those early tentative conversations, my carefully worded concerns about Vanessa's controlling tendencies, how Thomas had defended her, accused me of being unable to let go. of trying to sabotage his marriage because I was lonely after Harold died. You were in love, I said simply. We believe what we need to believe when we're in love. Thomas shook his head ruefully. I stopped being in love with Vanessa a long time ago. I just didn't admit it to myself. It was easier to go through the motions, to focus on work, to convince myself things would get better once we got past this rough patch. He sighed deeply. Meanwhile, she was planning her exit strategy, using my mother's insurance money as a financial cushion and keeping my children from their grandmother. His hand curled into a fist on the table, the first physical manifestation of the anger he had every right to feel. When I think about what she did to you, to us, focus on moving forward, I advised, covering his fist with my hand. The past can't be changed, but we have choices now. He nodded, his fist gradually relaxing under my touch. I've already called a divorce attorney and the bank to freeze our joint accounts. His mouth quirked in a humorless smile. You taught me well about protecting assets in a crisis. And the children? I asked gently. I'll fight for primary custody, he said without hesitation. With everything we have on Vanessa, the affair, the deception, plus her work schedule and travel commitments, I think we have a strong case. I nodded, relieved that Thomas was thinking clearly despite the emotional turmoil. And in the meantime, practically speaking, what happens now? Thomas ran a hand through his hair again, a nervous habit since childhood. I was hoping, would you consider staying here for a while? Just until things stabilize? The kids would love it, and frankly, I could use the support. The request caught me off guard. After months of exile from their lives, to be invited back so completely was more than I had dared hope for in the immediate aftermath. Of course, I agreed immediately. I can pack a bag today. Thank you, he said, genuine relief in his voice. And about the house, the ownership issue. I waved away his concern. That was leverage, nothing more. I have no intention of enforcing that clause. This is your home, yours and the children's. He looked around the kitchen, his expression contemplative. I'm not sure I want to stay here long term. Too many memories, too much of Vanessa in every room. I understood completely. After Harold died, I had rearranged furniture, repainted walls, changed curtains, anything to ease the constant reminders of absence. We can talk about that later, I assured him. One step at a time. Thomas nodded, then reached for my hand across the table. I keep thinking about that phone call, the things I said to you, how much pain I caused. You were manipulated, I reminded him. We all were. Still, he insisted. I should have known better, should have trusted the one person who has always been there for me. His voice broke slightly. Can you forgive me, Mom? In that moment, looking at my son, no longer the confident professional, but a wounded man seeking reconciliation, I felt the last of my anger dissolve. The revenge I had so meticulously planned had been satisfying. Yes, but this healing connection was the true victory. There's nothing to forgive, I told him, squeezing his hand. We start fresh from here. As we sat together at the kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the windows, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since that devastating phone call 6 months ago. The road ahead would not be easy. Divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, helping the children through the transition, but we would face it together as a family. Vanessa had tried to erase me from their lives, but in doing so, she had only ensured her own removal. It wasn't the revenge I had initially envisioned when I began my campaign, sitting shell-shocked in Gregory's office at the bank. It was something more complete, more healing, not just the destruction of a lie, but the restoration of truth. Later that afternoon, when we picked up Robert and Emma from their friend's house, Emma asked innocently, "Is Grandma going to make her famous spaghetti for dinner?" "If you'd like," I replied, my heart full as she slipped her small hand into mine. "Yes," she cheered. "And can we have movie night like we used to? With popcorn and fort blankets?" Thomas caught my eye over her head, a genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion. "I think that sounds perfect. Perfect not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because we were together again. And that, I realized, had been the true aim of my revenge all along. That first night back in Thomas's home, my grandchildren's home, felt like stepping into a parallel universe, where the past 6 months had never happened. Emma insisted I tuck her in, a ritual we had performed countless times before my exile, while Robert wanted to show me every baseball trophy and science award he had earned during my absence. Their eagerness to reconnect broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. As I stood in the doorway of Emma's room watching her finally drift off to sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit I had given her for her 7th birthday, a toy I was astonished Vanessa hadn't accidentally disposed of, Thomas appeared beside me, his voice low. "She's been having trouble sleeping," he confided. "Nightmares. The therapist says it's connected to the tension in the house. You've taken them to a therapist." I was impressed by his foresight. He nodded. "Started about 2 months ago. I thought it was just to help with normal childhood anxieties, but now..." He trailed off, his expression darkening. Now I realized they were picking up on much more than I knew. We retreated to the kitchen, where the remnants of our impromptu spaghetti dinner and movie night still cluttered the counter. I began cleaning up automatically, finding comfort in the familiar task. "Leave that," Thomas said, touching my arm gently. "You've done enough today. We should both get some rest." But rest proved elusive. I lay awake in the guest room surrounded by Vanessa's unused exercise equipment and forgotten craft projects, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and sighs of a house settling for the night. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Thomas moving around downstairs, the soft clink of a glass against the counter, the muted sound of the television turned to a low volume. He wasn't sleeping either. I debated joining him but decided against it. We had reconnected, yes, but there was still a fragility to our relationship, a tentative quality to our interactions that needed time to stabilize. Thomas needed space to process the collapse of his marriage, and I needed to be careful not to overreach, not to fulfill Vanessa's accusations of being controlling or intrusive. The next morning brought the first complication. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the doorbell rang. Thomas, already dressed for work, went to answer it. The heated voices that followed drew me to the entryway, where I found Thomas facing a furious Vanessa. "You changed the security code?" she demanded, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. "And froze the accounts? How dare you?" "How dare I?" Thomas's voice was controlled but tight with anger. "After what you've done, you're lucky I didn't change the locks too." Vanessa's gaze slid past him to me, standing in the hallway. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "I see. You've moved your mother in already. That didn't take long." "Mom's helping with the kids," Thomas replied evenly. "Something you might remember is part of being a parent." Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "Oh, that's rich. Tell me, Margaret, are you enjoying playing house? Taking my place?" "I'm not taking anyone's place," I said calmly, determined not to let her provoke me. "I'm supporting my family through a difficult time." "Your family?" she spat. "This is my family, my home, my children. The home that's legally in my name." I couldn't resist pointing out, immediately regretting the jab when I saw Thomas's expression tighten. This wasn't the time for scoring points. "If you think I'm going to let this stand," Vanessa began, but Thomas cut her off. "Enough. The children are still sleeping. If you want to talk, we can do it through our lawyers." "I need clothes, Thomas. Personal items." Her voice shifted, becoming more reasonable. A tactical adjustment. "At least let me pack a proper suitcase." Thomas hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine. 15 minutes. I'll be timing it." I retreated to the kitchen, giving them whatever privacy was possible in the tense situation. Through the window, I could see Vanessa's sleek Mercedes parked in the driveway, and beside it a slightly more modest Audi that I didn't recognize. Not her lover's car, surely. My question was answered moments later, when Thomas appeared in the kitchen, his expression grim. "She brought her brother," he said, answering my unspoken question. "Mark's waiting in the car. Apparently she's staying with him, not Mercer." That was surprising. Vanessa and her brother had never been particularly close from what I'd observed. Mark lived in Boston, worked in finance, and rarely visited. "Is that good or bad?" I asked cautiously. "I'm not sure," Thomas admitted. "Mark has always been somewhat reasonable, unlike his sister, but he's still family. He'll take her side." We heard Vanessa's heels clicking on the stairs as she descended, presumably with her suitcase. Thomas tensed, preparing to face her again. But the front door opened and closed without further confrontation. Thomas exhaled slowly. That's the first of many, I'm sure. He was right. Over the next week, our tentative family routine was punctuated by Vanessa's strategic appearances, always with a plausible reason, always carefully timed to maximize disruption. She needed more clothes. She had forgotten an important work document. She wanted to see the children. This last request was the most difficult to navigate. Despite everything, Vanessa was still Emma and Robert's mother. Thomas consulted with his divorce attorney, who advised allowing supervised visits while the custody arrangements were being formalized. The first such visit was excruciating. I made myself scarce, taking refuge in Diana's bookstore, while Vanessa spent 2 hours with the children at the house under Thomas's watchful eye. When I returned, Emma was tearful and confused, while Robert was uncharacteristically withdrawn. She told them she had to leave because I was unreasonable, Thomas reported, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Said I was trying to keep them from her, that I'd forced her out of her own home. The children know that's not true, I assured him, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. Children, even perceptive ones like Robert, could be manipulated by a parent they loved and trusted. Do they? Emma asked me why I was being mean to Mommy. His voice broke slightly. How do I explain to a 9-year-old that her mother has been lying, cheating, and manipulating all of us for years? I had no answer for him. Only time and consistency would help the children understand the complex adult situation they had been thrust into. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of the separation proceeded with surprising speed. Thomas's divorce attorney, a formidable woman named Eleanor Hargrove, moved aggressively to protect his interests and those of the children. Vanessa, perhaps recognizing the strength of the evidence against her, began to make noise about an amicable settlement. She's trying to salvage what she can, Eleanor explained during a strategy meeting at her office, where I had been invited at Thomas's insistence. The recordings, the photographs, they demolish any claim she might make for primary custody or significant alimony. Her best play now is to appear reasonable and cooperative. She's never been either of those things in her life, I remarked, earning a small smile from the usually serious attorney. Precisely why this sudden change of approach is suspect, Eleanor agreed. We need to be prepared for her to reveal her true strategy eventually. That strategy became clear 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Maple Street diner. I was helping Emma with her homework when my phone rang. Gregory Palmer from the bank. Mrs. Wilson, he began, his voice unusually formal. I've just received some concerning information I thought you should know about immediately. Someone has been making inquiries about your accounts and the structure of Wilson Heritage LLC. My blood ran cold. What kind of inquiries? Very specific ones, about the timing of the company's formation, the source of the initial capital, the purchase of the Oak Ridge Financial Center. He paused. They're looking for irregularities, Mrs. Wilson. Anything that might suggest improper financial dealings. Who is making these inquiries? I asked, though I already knew the answer. An attorney representing Vanessa Wilson. I thanked Gregory for the warning and immediately called James Franklin. His reaction confirmed my fears. She's building a case against you, he said grimly, trying to paint the company formation and property purchases as some kind of financial fraud or conspiracy. Can she do that? Everything was completely legal. Legal, yes, but the timing and motivation could be questioned. She could argue that you deliberately hid assets to impact divorce proceedings you knew were coming. But I didn't know. I only discovered the affair after I formed the company. We know that, James assured me, and we have the documentation to prove it. But it signals that Vanessa is moving from defense to offense. This is going to get uglier before it's resolved. He was right. The next day, Thomas was served with amended divorce papers, accusing him of conspiracy, financial misconduct, and parental alienation, turning the children against their mother. I was named as a co-conspirator, accused of using my financial resources to help Thomas deprive Vanessa of her rightful marital assets. This is absurd, Thomas fumed as we sat in Eleanor's office reviewing the documents. She's the one who had an affair, who alienated the children from their grandmother, who was planning to leave all along. It's a common tactic, Eleanor explained calmly. muddy the waters, create enough doubt and confusion that a judge might consider a more equitable division of assets despite the affair. She studied the documents with a practiced eye. The good news is that these accusations are largely unprovable. The bad news is that defending against them will be time-consuming and expensive. I don't care about the expense, Thomas declared. I won't let her spin this narrative. Not after everything she's done. I placed my hand over his. We'll fight this together. And fight we did. Over the next month, our lives fell into a strange rhythm dictated by legal maneuvers and counter-maneuvers. Thomas threw himself into building his case, working closely with Eleanor while still maintaining his job at the accounting firm. I took on more responsibility with the children, providing the stability they desperately needed amidst the chaos. Robert, with his analytical mind, seemed to understand the situation better than we had given him credit for. One evening, as I helped him organize his baseball cards, a project we had started before my exile and resumed upon my return, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom's not going to win, is she?" he asked matter-of-factly. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "These situations are complicated, Robert. It's not really about winning or losing." He shook his head, unconvinced by my diplomatic answer. "She lied. About you, about everything. Dad has all the evidence. She can't win." There was something in his voice, not vindictiveness, but a child's pure sense of justice, that moved me deeply. "The truth usually comes out in the end," I said carefully. "And whatever happens, you and Emma will be okay. That's what matters most." He nodded, returning to his meticulous sorting. "I'm glad you're back, Grandma. Things make sense when you're here." His simple declaration brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. "I'm glad to be back too." The turning point came 6 weeks after the initial confrontation. Thomas received an unexpected call from Mark, Vanessa's brother, requesting a private meeting. Suspicious but curious, Thomas agreed, suggesting a coffee shop halfway between Oak Ridge and Boston. He returned from that meeting transformed, the weight that had been pressing on him visibly lighter, his expression clearer than it had been in weeks. "Mark wants to testify," he announced as soon as he walked through the door. "Against Vanessa." I was stunned. "Her own brother? Why?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, still processing the information himself. "Apparently Vanessa has been staying with him since she left here. At first, she fed him the same story she's been pushing in the legal proceedings, that I was controlling, that you and I conspired against her, that she's the victim. But he didn't believe her. He might have, except," Thomas smiled grimly, "except Vanessa couldn't maintain the act 24/7. Living in close quarters, Mark started noticing discrepancies in her story. Then he overheard her on the phone with Mercer, discussing their plans, laughing about how they were going to take me to the cleaners in the divorce. I shook my head, amazed once again by Vanessa's capacity for self-destruction. "So he's turning on her?" "He's choosing truth," Thomas corrected. "Mark said he's always had concerns about Vanessa's relationship with the truth, even when they were children. But this, the scale of the deception, the calculated manipulation, it was too much for him to ignore. The impact of Mark's testimony was immediate and decisive. Faced with her own brother contradicting her carefully constructed narrative, Vanessa's legal strategy crumbled. Her attorney requested an emergency settlement conference, signaling her willingness to negotiate terms far more favorable to Thomas. Primary physical custody of the children, minimal spousal support for 1 year only. "The house remains with you." Eleanor ticked off the key points of the proposed settlement. "She gets to keep her retirement accounts and personal property. No public accusations of infidelity in the final divorce decree. She's cutting her losses," James observed from where he sat beside me in Eleanor's office, "trying to salvage what dignity she can." Thomas looked to me. "What do you think?" I considered carefully before responding. The vengeful part of me, the part that had planned so meticulously to expose Vanessa's betrayal, wanted to push for total victory, to see her humiliated completely. But the mother in me, the grandmother, recognized the wisdom in ending this cleanly and quickly. "I think the children have been through enough," I said finally. "This settlement gives you what matters most, custody and financial security. The rest is just pride." Thomas nodded, seemingly relieved by my assessment. "I agree. Let's end this. The actual signing of the settlement papers was anticlimactic. Vanessa appeared at Eleanor's office without her attorney. Her signature on the documents the only acknowledgement required. She did not look at Thomas or me. Her once perfect composure noticeably frayed around the edges. The woman who had systematically destroyed my family and then tried to frame me for financial misconduct couldn't even meet my eyes as she surrendered. As she turned to leave, Thomas spoke up. "The children still ask about you. Despite everything, they love you." Vanessa paused, her back to us. For a moment, I thought I detected a tremor in her shoulders. But when she turned, her expression was cold. "I'll contact you about visitation," she said flatly, and then she was gone. Later that evening, as Thomas, the children, and I celebrated with a special dinner at home, pizza, at Emma's insistence, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since that devastating phone call 7 months earlier. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had evolved into something far more meaningful: restoration. To new beginnings, Thomas proposed, raising his glass of sparkling cider in deference to the children's presence. "To family," Robert added solemnly, lifting his own glass. "To Grandma staying forever and ever," Emma chimed in, sloshing her drink dangerously in her enthusiasm. I laughed, steadying her glass with my hand. "Perhaps not forever, sweetheart, but I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." And I meant it. Thomas had asked me to extend my stay indefinitely, at least until they decided whether to keep the house or start fresh somewhere else. The children were thriving with the stability of my presence, their nightmares diminishing, their smiles returning more frequently. As for me, I had discovered something unexpected through this ordeal. The woman who had emerged from the crucible of Vanessa's betrayal was stronger, more decisive, more comfortable with her own power than the grieving widow who had received that cruel phone call. I had set out to reclaim my place in my family's life, but in the process, I had reclaimed myself as well. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Emma's laughter floating up from the backyard. I moved to the window to see Thomas pushing both children on the swings he had installed years ago, their faces tilted toward the sun, their worries momentarily forgotten in the simple joy of flight. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Breakfast at the reading corner. I want to hear the latest." I smiled, typing back, "Not today. Family time." The revenge was complete, not just because Vanessa had been exposed and defeated, but because what she had tried to destroy, our family bond, had emerged stronger than before. In trying to erase me from their lives, she had only ensured her own removal, her own replacement by the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was a far more powerful force than vengeance could ever be. When my son Thomas called me that Tuesday afternoon 7 months ago, his voice cold as he delivered those devastating words, "Don't come to dinner, Mom. My wife doesn't want you here." I could never have imagined the journey that single phone call would set in motion. A journey from heartbreak to vindication, from isolation to reconnection, from victim to victor. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've learned it's best served with perfect timing, irrefutable evidence, and the unwavering patience to see it through. The story I've shared with you over these past segments isn't just about getting even with a manipulative daughter-in-law. It's about reclaiming what was wrongfully taken from me, my family, my dignity, my place in my grandchildren's lives. The discovery of Harold's secret insurance policy was the first domino in a sequence that would ultimately expose Vanessa's web of lies. $2 million might seem like a fortune, but no amount of money could replace what Vanessa had stolen from me: the baseball games I missed, the dance recitals I was told were canceled, the Sunday baking sessions with Emma that abruptly ended. The casual cruelty with which she erased me from their lives still takes my breath away when I allow myself to dwell on it. But dwelling on past injuries serves no purpose. What matters is how we rise from them, how we transform pain into purpose. With the help of loyal friends like Diana and professionals like James and Michael, I channeled my hurt into a methodical plan, not just for revenge, but for restoration. Purchasing the Oak Ridge Financial Center, where Thomas worked, might seem extreme to some, but when you're fighting someone as calculating as Vanessa, conventional approaches won't suffice. The evidence of her affair with Jason Mercer the documentation of her systematic campaign to isolate Thomas from me, the discovery of her plans to leave once her promotion came through, these weren't just weapons in my arsenal. They were truths that needed to be revealed if my son and grandchildren were ever to be free from her manipulation. That confrontation at the Maple Street diner changed everything. I can still see Vanessa's face as she realized her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, as she recognized that the mother-in-law she had dismissed as a harmless nuisance had outmaneuvered her at every turn. There's a particular satisfaction in watching someone who has caused so much pain finally face the consequences of their actions. But the true victory wasn't in Vanessa's downfall. It was in Robert's courage as he showed his father the screenshots he'd been secretly collecting, proving his mother's deception. It was in Emma's unrestrained joy when I returned to their lives, her absolute certainty that I had never willingly abandoned her. It was in Thomas's gradual awakening to the truth, painful as it was, and his determination to protect his children from further harm. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Vanessa's counterattack, her attempts to paint me as a financial manipulator, her accusations of conspiracy, demonstrated just how desperately she would fight to maintain the narrative of her victimhood. But lies, no matter how elaborate, eventually collapse under their own weight. When even her own brother Mark could no longer stomach her deception, her defeat was assured. Now 6 months after the settlement was signed, our family has found a new equilibrium. Thomas and the children have moved to a different house in Oak Ridge, a fresh start in a home untainted by Vanessa's presence. I've kept my apartment but spent several days each week with them, present for homework sessions, baseball practices, dance lessons, and the 1,000 small moments that constitute a family's life. Vanessa sees the children every other weekend, an arrangement that Robert approaches with stoic resignation and Emma with diminishing enthusiasm as her mother's true nature becomes increasingly apparent even to her 9-year-old sensibilities. Thomas has begun dating again, cautiously, a kindergarten teacher named Melissa, who treats the children with genuine warmth and makes no attempt to replace or diminish my role in their lives. As for me, I've discovered an unexpected benefit of this ordeal, a renewed sense of purpose. The corporate entity I created for my revenge, Wilson Heritage LLC, has evolved into a legitimate business venture. With Diana as my partner, I've expanded beyond commercial real estate into small business investment, focusing particularly on women-owned enterprises in Oak Ridge. The skills I honed as a teacher, patience, strategic thinking, the ability to see potential where others might miss it, have translated surprisingly well to this new chapter of my life. Harold would be proud, I think, not just of how I protected our family, but of how I've continued to grow and evolve in his absence. The pain of losing him will never completely fade, but it's been tempered by the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever realized. Strong enough to face betrayal, to execute justice, and to rebuild what was broken. If there's a lesson in my story, perhaps it's this. When someone tries to erase you from the narrative, don't disappear quietly. Gather your resources, your intelligence, your allies, your evidence. Bide your time, and when the moment is right, reclaim your place with such undeniable force that you can never be removed again. I've shared my story with you over these past episodes because I believe in the power of shared experience. Many of you have written to me describing similar situations: manipulative in-laws, fractured family relationships, the pain of being separated from grandchildren. Know that you are not alone. Know that justice, while not always swift, is possible with persistence and strategy. If my journey has resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Revenge Expected. Each week, I share true stories of perfectly executed revenge against those who never saw it coming, not out of malice, but out of a belief that sometimes the best response to injustice is carefully planned, meticulously executed consequences. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of strategic thinkers who understand that the best revenge isn't just about getting even, it's about rising from the ashes stronger than before. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on my story or describing a situation where you wish you could enact similar justice. Your comments aren't just appreciated, They're vital to building this community of support and strategy. If you found value in my story and would like to support the channel, please consider using the Super Thanks feature. Your financial contribution helps cover the substantial costs of producing these videos, from research to editing to the countless hours spent crafting each narrative. With your support, we can continue bringing you daily content that empowers and inspires. And for those who've already subscribed and supported the channel, my deepest gratitude. Your engagement makes it possible for me to share these stories, to connect with others who have faced similar challenges, and to spread the message that sometimes the most unexpected revenge is the most satisfying. Until next time, this is Margaret Wilson from Revenge Expected, reminding you that patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon when wielded with precision and purpose. The call that was meant to exclude me ultimately led to my triumphant return, stronger and more essential than ever before. Remember, sometimes the end of one story is merely the beginning of a better one. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding. And most importantly, thank you for being part of this journey with me.